I'm so glad we're together.
Me too, Grandma.
You make everything better.
I love you.
I'm right here with you, my dear.
I was scared.
I know. We'll get through this. I love you so much, sweetie.
I love you too, Grandma.
You're my little angel. It's going to be all right, sweetie.
I know, Grandma.
That's my brave one.
It's going to be okay, Grandma.
Oh, sweetie, thank you.
I love you.
I love you too. Everything will be all right, dear.
I know, Grandma.
That's my brave girl.
I love you. Grandma, are you okay?
Yes, sweetie, I'm right here.
I was so worried. I love you, Grandma.
I know it's hard, sweetie.
Will you stay with me?
Always, my dear. I'm right here.
Everything around her seemed to be moving at a terrifying speed. Nurses walked by in crisp uniforms, their rubber soles squeaking against the polished linoleum floor. Their faces were focused, serious, and determined. They had things to do, places to be, patients to see. They didn't have time to stop. Nobody had time. Just 30 minutes ago, a doctor had called her into a small, sterile room. He had been kind, but his eyes were tired and distant. He held a file in his hand and spoke softly, using words that Edith didn't fully understand at first. Then the meaning of those words settled over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He told her about the tests. He told her that the prognosis was not good. He told her she needed to get her affairs in order. He said, "I'm sorry." And then he stood up, shook her hand briefly, and left her to walk back out into the bright, crowded hallway alone. Now, sitting back in the hard plastic chair, Edith felt a lump in her throat that wouldn't go away. She swallowed hard, trying to push it down, but it was no use. A tear slipped out of the corner of her eye, rolling down the deep lines on her cheek. She wiped it away quickly with her tissue. She didn't want to make a scene. She had been raised to be strong, to keep her emotions private. But the pain was too heavy. It wasn't just the diagnosis, it was the silence that came with it. She had nobody to call. Her husband, Walter, had passed away 5 years ago. They never had children. Her friends had either moved away to warmer climates or were already gone. The lobby was packed with people. It was a sea of faces, yet Edith felt like she was on a deserted island. To her left, a young couple sat together. The man had his arm around the woman, whispering something in her ear to comfort her. They looked scared, but they had each other. To her right, a teenager sat with headphones on, nodding his head to music, completely lost in his own world. He looked oblivious to the sickness and worry that filled the room. Edith watched the automatic glass doors at the entrance slide open and shut with a rhythmic swish. Every time they opened, a gust of air from the street swept in. It smelled like exhaust fumes and hot pavement. It smelled like a world that was still moving forward, a world she felt she was slowly leaving behind. People walked through those doors with purpose. A man in a gray suit rushed in, talking loudly on a phone, his brow furrowed in frustration. He walked right past Edith, his eyes scanning the room for the reception desk, not even glancing at the old woman crying softly in the corner. "Excuse me," a sharp voice said. Edith flinched and looked up. A woman in a bright red coat was standing in front of her, looking impatient. The woman held a takeaway coffee cup in one hand and was pointing with the other. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the empty plastic chair next to Edith. Edith shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. Her voice was raspy and weak. "Thanks," the woman said. She sat down heavily, sighing as she pulled her phone out of her purse. She didn't look at Edith again. She didn't notice the redness around Edith's eyes, or the way the old woman's hands trembled as she held her handbag. The woman was too busy scrolling through pictures on her screen, tapping and liking things that didn't matter. Edith looked back down at her lap. It wasn't that she expected a parade or even a long conversation, but a simple look of acknowledgement would have been nice. A smile, a nod, something to say, "I see you." "You exist." Time seemed to stretch and distort. The large clock on the wall ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. Each second felt like an hour. The silence in her head was screaming. She thought about Walter. She missed him so much it physically hurt. He would have known what to say. He would have held her hand. He would have told her that the doctor was wrong or that they would fight this together. But there was no Walter. There was just this cold, bright room and 1,000 strangers who didn't care. She felt another wave of grief crash over her, stronger this time. Her shoulders began to shake. She pressed the tissue to her eyes, trying to muffle the sound, but a small sob escaped her lips. It wasn't loud, but in the lull of the waiting room noise, it was audible. A security guard standing near the elevator glanced over. He was a big man with a radio on his shoulder. He looked at Edith for a moment. She looked up, hopeful for a second, thinking maybe he would ask if she was okay. But he just shifted his weight from one foot to the other and looked away, checking his watch. He probably thought she was just another upset patient. It happened all the time. It wasn't his job to comfort people. It wasn't anyone's job. Edith felt small. She felt like a piece of dust that had settled in the corner, unnoticed until someone decided to sweep it away. She was in the way, taking up space, making noise. The diagnosis was terrifying, but the loneliness was worse. It was the kind of loneliness that made you question if you were real. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? If a woman cries in a room full of people and no one looks, is she really crying? She looked at the people passing by the glass doors outside. They were walking fast, talking to friends, carrying grocery bags. They had lives. They had plans for dinner. They had families to go home to. Edith felt like she was stuck behind an invisible wall of glass. She reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against the cold metal of her house keys. She would have to go home soon. She would have to walk into her empty house with its quiet rooms and its dusty furniture. She would have to sit in her chair and wait. Just wait. The weight of it all was crushing her chest. She coughed, a dry, hacking sound. The woman in the red coat next to her shifted in her seat, moving her purse further away from Edith, as if sadness were a virus she could catch. That small movement cut Edith deep. It was a rejection of her very existence. "Ma'am," a receptionist called out from the front desk, not looking at anyone in particular. "We need to verify some insurance information for the gentleman in Bay 4. Edith looked up, but the receptionist wasn't talking to her. Nobody was talking to her. She was a ghost in a beige coat. She wiped her face again, the skin around her eyes feeling raw and tight. The tears kept coming, blurring her vision. The bright lights of the hospital seemed to swirl and dance. She closed her eyes tightly, wishing she could just disappear, wishing she could be anywhere but here, invisible and ignored, a sobbing statue in a room full of statues. The tears were not stopping. Edith tried to be brave, she really did. She bit her lip, tasting the faint, metallic tang of blood where she had chewed it raw. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping that if she couldn't see the world couldn't see her. But the tears were stubborn. They leaked out anyway, sliding down her face and dripping off her chin onto her beige coat. They were hot at first, then quickly turned cold against her skin. The waiting room seemed to get louder. The noise of the hospital was like a wave. It rose up and crashed over her. A child started crying somewhere across the room, a sharp, piercing wail. The mother hushed the child, rocking it back and forth. At least someone is holding that child, Edith thought. At least someone cares. She looked down at her own hands. They were empty. They were spotted with age, the skin thin and translucent like paper. The blue veins stood out, mapping a journey of blood that would soon stop flowing. She thought about the doctor's words again. Palliative care, that was the phrase he used. It sounded clean, clinical. It sounded like cleaning a wound. But what it really meant was waiting to die. She was 82 years old. She had lived a long life. She knew that, but knowing it didn't make the end any easier. She wasn't ready. There were still flowers in her garden that needed watering. There was a recipe for apple pie she had promised to give to her neighbor. There were little things, small threads that tied her to the world, and the doctor was cutting them all with a pair of sharp scissors. A sudden burst of laughter made her flinch. She looked up. A group of young people was sitting near the vending machines. They were sharing a bag of chips, laughing at something on a phone screen. Their joy was loud and bright. It felt like an insult. How could they laugh? How could the world be happy when she was breaking into pieces right here? But they didn't know. To them, she was just an old lady. Old ladies cry. It's what they do. That was the assumption. It was easier to assume she was just having a bad day, or maybe she was senile, or maybe she just missed the bus. The man in the gray suit stood up. He had been sitting 2 seats away from her. As he stood, he checked his watch, a glinting silver thing on his wrist. He sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of impatience. He looked at Edith, and for a second their eyes met. Edith saw his expression clearly. It wasn't concern, it was annoyance. His brows were pulled together, his mouth turned down in a frown. He looked at her the way one might look at a broken air conditioner or a flickering light, something that was inconvenient and needed to be fixed or ignored. He shook his head slightly, as if to say, "Keep it down, lady." Then he turned on his heel and walked away, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically against the floor. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer a tissue, he just left to find a quieter spot to conduct his business. That look hurt more than the tears. It was a slap in the face. It told her that her pain was an inconvenience. It told her that her grief was something to be hidden away, not shared. Edith shrank back into her chair. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, trying to disappear inside the fabric. She wished she could just dissolve into the air. She wished she could become the dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the window. "Did you hear about the merger?" A man's voice said loudly behind her. "It's going to be huge. I'm looking at a big bonus." Edith closed her eyes. The voices washed over her. Mergers, bonuses. Coffee orders, traffic, the mundane problems of the living. She felt like she was standing on a shore watching the ship sail away without her. She was being left behind. A nurse walked by her chair. This one was younger, with her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She was carrying a stack of manila folders and a cup of ice. She slowed down as she passed Edith. Edith looked up, her eyes blurry with tears. "Please, asterisk," she thought. "Please ask me if I'm okay. Please just say one word." The nurse paused. She looked at Edith's tear-streaked face. For a heartbeat, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe pity, maybe recognition. But then her radio crackled with static. "Code Blue, room 304. "Code Blue." The nurse's face hardened instantly. The mask of professionalism snapped back into place. The emergency was elsewhere. The crying woman was stable. She was breathing. She wasn't bleeding out. She was just sad. The nurse tightened her grip on the files and sped up, her sneakers squeaking as she rounded the corner and vanished. She had bigger problems than a lonely old woman's tears. Edith let out a shaky breath. It was a ragged sound, half sob, half gasp. She looked around the room again. The woman in the red coat was still there, still scrolling through her phone. The teenager with the headphones was bobbing his head. The receptionists were typing. The security guard was talking to a janitor about a spill on the floor. Nobody was looking. The realization settled on Edith like a physical weight. She was invisible. She could scream at the top of her lungs, and people would probably just check their watches and move to another section of the room. The loneliness was absolute. It was a cold, hollow ache in the center of her chest. It was worse than the fear of death. Dying was natural. Dying alone, surrounded by people who didn't care, was a tragedy. She opened her purse and fumbled for her handkerchief. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't find it. She knocked over a small coin purse. Coins spilled out onto the floor, quarters, dimes, pennies. They clattered loudly, rolling across the linoleum. "Oh no, asterisk," she thought. "Now I'm making a mess." She bent down to pick them up, her stiff back protesting. Her fingers scrabbled against the cold floor. She saw a penny roll near a pair of sneakers. It was a young man in jeans. He stepped over the penny, not even breaking his stride. He didn't stop. He didn't help. He just walked over her mess, leaving her to crawl on the floor. Edith sat back up, clutching the coins she had managed to retrieve. Her face burned with shame. She felt small. She felt like a child who had been scolded. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture that felt undignified and raw. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one. "I'm sorry for being in the way." The automatic doors at the entrance whooshed open again. The sound of the street traffic grew louder for a moment, then faded as the doors sealed shut. Edith stared at those doors. She wanted to go through them. She wanted to walk out into the gray afternoon and keep walking until her legs gave out. But where would she go? Home to an empty house. To a silent kitchen, she sat back, defeated. The tears started again, faster this time. She wasn't just crying about the diagnosis anymore. She was crying for the husband she missed. She was crying for the friends she had buried. She was crying for the youth she had lost. And most of all, she was crying for the cruelty of a world that was too busy to look an old woman in the eye. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, letting the sobs come, letting the wall of indifference close tight around her. The automatic glass doors slid open with their familiar rhythmic swoosh. The sound cut through the low hum of conversation and the rhythmic beeping of monitors in the distance. For a moment, the stale, conditioned air of the hospital lobby mixed with the fresh, slightly exhaust-tinged breeze from the street outside. People walked in, a man with a limp, a woman carrying a bouquet of wilting tulips. But the doors stayed open just a second longer as a young mother stepped inside, holding the hand of a small girl. The little girl, whose name was Sophie, was 6 years old. She had messy pigtails that were slightly uneven, held up by bright blue hair ties. She wore a pink jacket that was a little too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her wrists. She walked with a skip in her step, her eyes wide open, taking in everything. To Sophie, this wasn't a place of sadness or sickness. It was a giant building with bright lights and lots of people to watch. She looked at the polished floor, seeing her own reflection staring back at her. She looked at the vending machine in the corner, glowing with the promise of chips and candy. Her mother, a tired-looking woman with dark circles under her eyes, was in a hurry. She held a crumpled piece of paper in her other hand, a referral slip or maybe an insurance form. She wasn't looking at the room. She was looking at the reception desk, her eyes scanning for the shortest line. "Come on, sweetie, stay close," the mother said, her voice tight with stress. She didn't want to be here. She had taken time off work and the parking meter was ticking away outside. She needed to get this over with. "We just need to drop this off and then we can go." "Don't wander." Sophie nodded, but her attention was already drifting. She saw a man in a wheelchair. She saw a nurse carrying a tray of small paper cups. And then she saw something else. She saw the lady in the corner. While the rest of the room was a blur of movement and noise, the lady in the corner was very still. Sophie tilted her head to the side. She didn't see an old woman or a nuisance. She saw a person who was leaking. The lady's face was wet. Her shoulders were shaking just a little bit, like a leaf in the wind. Sophie knew what crying looked like. She cried when she scraped her knee. She cried when she couldn't find her favorite stuffed bear. When she cried, her mom or her dad would come over, give her a hug and say, "It's okay." But this lady was crying and nobody was coming over. People walked right past her. The man in the suit walked by. The nurse walked by. The woman in the red coat sat right next to her and didn't even look. Sophie frowned. It didn't make sense to her 6-year-old mind. If someone was sad, you helped them. That was the rule of the playground. If someone fell down, you helped them up. "Sophie, stay here by this pillar," her mother said, spotting an empty spot near the wall. "I have to go talk to that lady at the desk. Don't move." "Okay, Mommy," Sophie said. Her mother let go of her hand and hurried toward the reception window, merging into the stream of adults. Sophie stood by the smooth, round pillar for exactly 10 seconds. Then her feet started to move. She didn't run. She walked with a slow, determined purpose. She was on a mission. She navigated through the forest of legs. A man in boots stepped back, almost bumping into her, but she sidestepped him neatly. She moved past a woman pushing a laundry cart. She was small, so nobody really noticed her moving through the crowd. She was like a small fish swimming upstream, dodging the rocks and the currents. As she got closer to the corner, the sounds of the hospital seemed to fade away for her. She wasn't listening to the announcements over the PA system anymore. She was focused entirely on the lady in the beige coat. Edith didn't see the little girl coming. Her eyes were blurred with tears, and her head was bowed low. She was trapped in her own dark bubble of sorrow, replaying the doctor's words over and over again. Palliative care. Affairs in order. She felt the coldness of the room seeping into her bones. She felt the crushing weight of being alone. She wished the ground would just open up and swallow her whole. Then she felt a change. It wasn't a sound, it was a presence. A small warmth appeared right in front of her. Edith blinked, trying to clear her vision. She thought maybe a nurse had come back to tell her to move or that her time was up. She looked down. Standing between her knees was a little girl. Sophie was close enough that Edith could see the small scuff on the toe of her sneaker. She could see the tiny freckle on the girl's left cheek. She could smell the faint scent of strawberry shampoo and something else, something simple and clean like crayons or chalk. Sophie didn't say a word at first. She just stood there looking up at Edith with big hazel eyes. There was no fear in them. There was no annoyance. There was just a pure, simple curiosity and a deep, instinctive kindness. Edith held her breath. She didn't know what to do. She was used to being ignored. She was used to being looked at with pity or impatience. But this was different. This child was asterisk looking at her. Really looking. It felt like the first time in years someone had actually seen her as a person, not just a piece of furniture. Sophie tilted her head to the other side. She watched a fresh tear roll down Edith's cheek. The little girl reached into the pocket of her pink jacket. It was a deep pocket, and she had to dig around for a moment. Her small tongue poked out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. Edith watched, confused. What was she doing? Sophie pulled her hand out. In her palm, she held a small, slightly squashed piece of candy. It was wrapped in shiny blue foil. It was a chocolate probably left over from lunch or saved for later. It was a treasure. Sophie extended her arm, offering the candy to the crying woman. "For you," Sophie said. Her voice was soft, but in the quiet corner it sounded loud and clear. "It helps when you're sad." Edith stared at the candy. She stared at the small, outstretched hand. The skin was smooth and young, a stark contrast to her own wrinkled, paper-thin hands. The kindness of the gesture was so sudden, so unexpected, that it short-circuited Edith's brain. She couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight, but this time it wasn't from grief, it was from shock. The little girl didn't pull away. She kept her hand there, steady as a rock. She waited. She didn't mind that Edith hadn't said thank you yet. She understood that sometimes, when you are really sad, words are hard to find. Then Sophie did something even simpler. She reached out with her other hand. She found Edith's hand, which was resting cold and trembling on her knee. Sophie slipped her small, warm fingers into Edith's palm. She interlaced their fingers, holding on tight. It was a clumsy grip. Sophie's fingers were small and didn't fit perfectly between Edith's, but it was the strongest grip in the world. Edith gasped. It was a small, sharp intake of breath. The warmth from the child's hand shot up Edith's arm like an electric current. It traveled past her elbow, past her shoulder, and straight into her heart. The coldness of the hospital room vanished. The buzz of the fluorescent lights disappeared. The fear of the doctor's diagnosis faded into the background. For the first time all day, Edith didn't feel invisible. The touch was real. It was physical proof that she was still here, that she was still connected to the world. A child, a stranger, had crossed the room to hold her hand. "You're shaking," Sophie whispered, squeezing the hand a little tighter. "It's okay, I'm here." The silence that followed was not empty, it was full. For a long moment, the only thing that existed in the hospital lobby was the point where the little girl's hand touched the old woman's skin. It was a circuit closing. A spark jumped between them, invisible but powerful enough to jumpstart a heart that had nearly stopped beating from grief. Edith stared at the small, warm hand intertwined with her own cold fingers. The contrast was striking. Her skin was pale, marked with age spots and thin blue veins that map a long history. Sophie's hand was smooth, pink, and unlined. It was a hand that had not yet touched the rough edges of the world. And yet it was this small, untested hand that was holding Edith up, anchoring her to the earth so she wouldn't float away into her sorrow. The lump in Edith's throat loosened. She took a deep, shaky breath. It was the first real breath she had taken since she walked out of the doctor's office. The air felt different now. It didn't taste stale and medicinal. It tasted like hope. She looked from the hand up to the little girl's face. Sophie was still staring at her, her head tilted, waiting patiently. There was no expectation in her eyes, no rush. She was just there. "Thank you," Edith whispered. Her voice was barely audible, cracking on the edges. It didn't sound like her own voice. It sounded like a ghost finding its way back to the living. Sophie beamed. A wide, gap-toothed smile spread across her face. "You're welcome," she said. "My name is Sophie. What's your name?" "Edith," the old woman replied. "My name is Edith." "Hi, Edith," Sophie said, testing the name out. She squeezed the hand again. "I like your coat. It looks soft." It was such a simple thing to say, a comment on a coat. But to Edith, it was a lifeline. It was an acknowledgement of her existence. Someone saw her coat. Someone saw her asterisk. The tears were still drying on her cheeks, but they stopped falling. The desperate, sinking feeling in her chest was replaced by a warm flutter. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was a person named Edith, and she had a nice coat, and she was holding hands with a little girl named Sophie. The ripple effect started slowly. It began with the woman sitting next to them. The woman in the red coat had been aggressively ignoring Edith for the last hour. She had built a wall around herself made of her phone and her coffee and her own busy thoughts. But the sound of the child's voice had pierced right through that wall. She stopped scrolling. Her thumb hovered over the screen of her phone, frozen in midair. She looked over at the scene unfolding beside her. She saw the back of the little girl's head, the messy pigtails, the pink jacket. She saw the old woman, Edith, looking at the child with an expression of pure, overwhelming gratitude. The woman in red felt a sudden, sharp pang of shame in her stomach. It was a physical ache. She had sat right next to this woman while she cried. She had moved her purse away as if sadness were catching. She had judged her as a nuisance. And now a child, who had no reason to care, who owed this stranger nothing, was doing the one thing every adult in the room had failed to do. The woman in the red coat blinked. She felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. She looked at the phone in her hand, the screen full of meaningless pictures and status updates. It all seemed so trivial now, so incredibly unimportant. She locked the screen, the light fading to black, and slowly lowered it to her lap. She cleared her throat softly. It was a tentative sound. She reached into her purse, her movements slower, more thoughtful this time. Her fingers found the cold plastic of a water bottle she had bought at the vending machine. She pulled it out. "Excuse me," the woman said. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. She felt like an intruder in a sacred moment, but she couldn't just sit there anymore. She leaned forward slightly, catching Edith's eye. Edith looked up, startled. She had forgotten anyone else was there. She tensed up, expecting another look of annoyance. I noticed you were crying," the woman said. The words sounded clumsy, but the intent behind them was genuine. She held out the water bottle. "I have this extra water. It's cold. Maybe it would help." Edith stared at the bottle. It was such a small offering, a bottle of water, but coming from the woman who had been ignoring her for an hour, it was a miracle. It was proof that the ice was melting. It was proof that the little girl's kindness was infectious. "Oh," Edith breathed. She took the water bottle with her free hand, the one that wasn't holding Sophie's hand. "Thank you." "Thank you so much." The woman in the red coat smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it reached her eyes. "Of course," she said. I hope you're okay." Across the room, the change was spreading. The man in the gray suit, the one who had checked his watch and walked away in annoyance, had stopped near the elevators. He was waiting for the light to change so he could cross the hall, but he hadn't moved. He had turned around. He watched the little girl standing between the old woman's knees. He watched the interaction. He saw the woman in the red coat offer the water. He saw the old woman wipe her eyes and actually smile. He felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He remembered the look of disgust he had given the old woman just 20 minutes ago. He remembered thinking she was just holding up the line, just making noise. He looked at his watch again. It was a reflex, but this time he didn't care about the time. He felt a sudden urge to apologize, to walk over there and say he was sorry for being so heartless. But he was too far away and the moment seemed too fragile. He didn't want to break it, so he did the only thing he could do. He took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and bowed his head slightly in respect. He made a silent promise to himself that next time he would stop. Next time he wouldn't be too busy. The nurse who had rushed by earlier, the one with the ponytail, was walking back from the emergency wing. She was moving fast, her mind already on the next patient. But as she cut through the waiting area, something made her slow down. It was the vibe of the room. The heavy, oppressive sadness that usually hung over the corner where Edith sat had lifted. She paused, looking over. She saw the little girl, Sophie, standing like a guardian angel in pink. She saw the old woman holding the child's hand like it was a bar of gold. She saw the woman in the red coat sitting on the edge of her seat, engaged and concerned. The nurse stopped walking. She forgot about her clip chart for 5 seconds. A small smile touched her lips. She saw hundreds of sad people every day. She saw tragedy and pain until she became numb to it. It was a survival mechanism. But seeing this, seeing a community spontaneously form around one broken person, it cracked the shell around her heart too. The security guard, standing near the pillar, watched the scene with a knowing look. He saw these things happen sometimes. He saw the best and the worst of people. He saw the man who stole a purse, but he also saw the little girl who gave a candy. He nodded to himself. He shifted his weight, crossing his arms, watching the room with a little less suspicion and a little more hope. Sophie, oblivious to the waves she was making in the room, looked down at the candy in Edith's other hand, the chocolate in the blue foil. "Can you eat it now?" Sophie asked, her voice carrying in the sudden hush of the corner. It's really good. It's got caramel inside. Edith looked at the small, squashed candy. It was a treasure. It was a symbol. She nodded, her eyes filling with fresh tears, but these were different. These were tears of relief. I will, Edith said. She used her thumb to unwrap the foil. It crinkled loudly in the quiet. She popped the small chocolate into her mouth. It was sweet and sticky and perfect. It's delicious, Sophie. See, Sophie said, satisfied. She leaned her head against Edith's knee, a gesture of pure affection. I told you. In that moment, the hospital wasn't a cold, lonely place anymore. The fluorescent lights didn't seem so harsh. The smell of disinfectant was overpowered by the scent of strawberry shampoo. The invisible wall that Edith had built around herself, the wall that everyone else had reinforced with their indifference, had been knocked down by a 6-year-old girl. And as the wall fell, the people around her, who had been sleeping in their own bubbles of indifference, began to wake up. They began to look. They began to see. And for the first time in a long time, Edith felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She wasn't alone.